many people today. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ANU China Seminar Series. I'm Edward Chen. I'm a postdoc of the Australian Centre on China and the World. And then first, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the land, the Ngunnawal and Cambry people, which we meet and pay our respect to their elders, past and present. So today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Andrew Kennedy with us today. Andrew is an associate professor at the Crawford School of Public Policies, and he specialized in international and comparative politics, with particular interest in China, India, and the US. So today, he will share with us some insight of one of his current research project, which is about China's rise as a science and technological power. So looking at how China has embraced the innovation system in this policymaking. So, Andy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Edward, for that very kind introduction. I'd like to start by thanking the ANU Center on China and the World for its generous support for China studies at the university and for making this seminar possible. The title of my talk is Paradigm Change, the Rise of Guided Innovation in China. And I want to start by emphasizing the importance of China's policies in the domain of science, technology, and innovation. As China develops, the way in which it pursues scientific knowledge and technological innovation will powerfully influence its economic growth, its environmental impact, its military development, and its international prestige. China's progress in this realm has also sparked an intensifying rivalry with the United States. Even so, we still have lots to learn about what China is doing in this space and why it is doing it. And I'm hoping to shed some light on that in this talk. So the talk I'm giving today is based on, or draws on an article that I've recently published in Review of International Political Economy, which is pictured on the screen here. If you'd like to know more about this topic, please have a look at the article or get in touch with me about accessing it. I want to start with a basic puzzle. Overall, China's approach to science, technology, and innovation policy, or SDI policy, has really transformed since the 1990s. We've seen growing interest in concepts like indigenous innovation and innovation-driven development. We've also seen a more comprehensive approach in which China is concerned not merely with science and technology, but also with wider innovation processes. And in that sense, it's become more like many Western countries. But we've also seen a more state-centric approach in which the party state has sought to be a major organizer of innovation, to use Xi Jinping's words. In that sense, it's really followed its own path and diverged in important ways from Western countries. Why has this happened, and how do we make sense of these trends? Well, it's tempting to see China as reacting to the intensifying trade and technology war with the United States and other countries. I offer a different explanation, one that looks at longer-term trends in China. My argument consists of four basic points. First, China's changing policies reflect changing policy paradigms within the country in the realm of science, technology, and innovation. Second, since the founding of the CCP, party elites have resisted or adapted STI policy paradigms from abroad. Third, since the 1990s, party leaders have made the choice to adapt what is known as innovation systems policy paradigm. And fourth, the party state's efforts to guide China's innovation system reflect how this paradigm has been localized. So I developed these points in the remainder of my talk. First, I'll explain what policy paradigms are, talk about policy paradigms in the domain of STI policy, and explain how a country can transition from what is known as the S&T policy paradigm to what is known as the innovation systems policy paradigm. Then I'll talk about how China in particular has made this transition. Lastly, I'll talk about the policies and practices this transition has inspired, and I'll discuss the rise of what I call guided innovation in China. So let me start by saying a bit more about what policy paradigms are. In general, policy paradigms are belief systems that shape how policy is made in a given domain, as opposed to broader developmental ideologies. Peter Hall's classic study focused on macroeconomic policy, and in particular, the shift from Keynesian to monetarist thinking in the United Kingdom. The concept has since been applied to a wide range of other policy domains. Going back to Hall's work, policy paradigms are often presented as hierarchical in nature. But more specifically, they include both foundational concepts regarding the nature of reality in the policy domain and lower order beliefs about the challenge for government and the solutions available to it. This means that individual paradigms may include variants, paradigms that share the same foundational concepts, but feature different lower order beliefs regarding government's challenge and what it can do. In recent years, scholars have identified several distinct policy paradigms that have animated STI policy in multiple countries. In the paper, I built on that work by documenting the concepts and beliefs that comprise these paradigms, while also highlighting their variants. The first and oldest paradigm in this domain is called the S&T policy paradigm. Its foundational concepts are particular conceptions of science and technology. A lot could be said about these conceptions and how they originated, but I just want to make two key points here. The first is that S&T knowledge is seen as the answer to a broad range of societal challenges. Simply put, the more science and technology, more science and technology means more societal benefit. This is essentially what Daniel Sarowitz has called the myth of infinite benefit. The second point is that the paradigm has traditionally featured an elitist conception of scientific knowledge production. S&T progress is seen as driven by highly educated individuals. As Vannevar Bush wrote in his famous report, Science, the Endless Frontier in 1945, the responsibility for the creation of new scientific knowledge rests on that small body of men and women who understand the fundamental laws of nature and are skilled in the techniques of scientific research. In this context, the challenge for government is developing and applying S&T expertise for national benefit. The solution to this challenge is state support for S&T, but such support can take different forms. In state-led S&T, the government articulates technological priorities and channels resources to support them. In a centrally planned system, for example, this manifests in science planning. In society-led S&T, the government channels resources to societal actors, and these actors are free to decide what their priorities are. R&D tax credits are a good example of this. In practice, policymakers often favor a mix of policies, and we can imagine a range of variants between purely state-led and purely society-led S&T. In the 1980s, a new paradigm began to emerge in the writings of heterodox Western economists focused on how innovation works. The new paradigm was rooted in a new foundational concept, the innovation system. In this view, S&T knowledge does not readily translate into useful technologies. Instead, it is mediated through a wider system through which new ideas and inventions are put into practice. In keeping with this conception of reality, the challenge for government was no longer simply supporting S&T activity. Instead, government also had to take a wider view and cultivate a national innovation system. Solutions to this challenge include policies to support both the supply of innovation and the demand for it. Supply side measures include support for knowledge sharing and collaboration among different actors in the economy, as well as creating a supportive environment for entrepreneurs, including access to finance for new ventures. Demand side measures include the provision or promotion of markets for innovations through government procurement or through policies to stimulate private demand for new products. As in the S&T policy paradigm, the state can play a more or less prominent role in solutions. In what I call laissez-faire innovation, the government promotes innovation in general rather than any particular kind of innovation. This approach often reflects the conviction that government is poorly positioned to pick winners. In what I call guided innovation, government attempts to guide the innovation system in pursuit of national priorities. It's important to note that the potential for guided innovation was noted from the outset. In 1987, Christopher Freeman's pioneering book on Japan, the first published work to use the phrase national innovation system, devoted substantial attention to Japan's pursuit of certain strategic goals and its vision of economic change. Once again, policymakers often favor a mix of policies, and we can imagine a range of variants between purely laissez-faire innovation and purely guided innovation. So how does a government transition from one paradigm to another in this domain? Well, one way this can take place is through a process of diffusion as new countries are exposed to the new paradigm and react to it. I see this as a three-step process building on recent work in diffusion theory. The first step consists of exposure to the new paradigm. This could take place when international organizations or when it's promoted by international organizations or by epistemic communities that are invested in the belief system. It's been noted that both of these are relevant in the case of the innovation systems policy paradigm, which has been championed by the OECD in particular, and which has been developed its own intellectual following in academia and government. The second step concerns the political reaction of quote-unquote veto players in the receiving country. Do they choose to resist the new paradigm or to adapt and make use of it? If key decision makers choose to resist the paradigm, it's going to have limited impact. If they choose to adapt it, however, then we move on to the third step, which is localization. Paradigms aren't simply copied as they diffuse. Instead, they are localized to fit with the domestic context. In this case, local economic ideology is a key variable in shaping the particular variant of the innovation systems policy paradigm that emerges. If there's strong support for state intervention, there's likely to be an emphasis on guided innovation. Alternatively, if state intervention is seen as counterproductive, there's likely to be an emphasis on laissez-faire innovation. So how does all of this help us to understand China? Well, for one thing, it helps us to understand the paradigm change that has taken place in China in recent decades. So let me set the stage for this discussion by going back in time. For the first half century of its existence, from the 1920s to the 1970s, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, alternated between adapting and resisting the S&T policy paradigm. This alternating approach was evident in the revolutionary period, particularly when the party was based in Yunnan, and it continued after 1949. Inspired by the Soviet Union, the CCP initially focused on adapting the paradigm to a centrally planned system in the 1950s. Mao Zedong, however, was repelled by the elitism inherent in the paradigm, and he ultimately sought to develop an alternative based on mass science, an effort that started during the Great Leap Forward and that culminated in the Cultural Revolution. Following Mao's death, China's new leaders chose to adapt the S&T policy paradigm, and they prized S&T as the key to national development. Deng Xiaoping, in particular, touted S&T as one of the four modernizations, along with industry, agriculture, and national defense. In fact, Deng said that S&T was the most important of the four modernizations since the other three all depended on it. By 1988, Deng was stating that S&T was the #1 productive force, a phrase that soon became a mantra in party discourse. In terms of lower order beliefs, there was a strong belief in state-led S&T at the start of the decade, in keeping with the tradition of central planning. As interest grew in market-led economic growth, however, there was growing interest in experiments with society-led S&T, as expressed in the 1985 decision on S&T system reform. A very different perspective on STI policy began to emerge in the 1990s, however, as Chinese academics and policymakers were exposed to the innovation systems policy paradigm. This exposure is evident in the writings of Chinese scholars who began referring to the national innovation system concept shortly after it emerged in the West. The first articles to use the phrase in China emerged in the early 1990s, sparking growing interest over time, as you can see from the graph here. This growing literature in China drew inspiration from the Western literature on the subject, as these Chinese writings were full of references to Western scholars and Western texts. Chinese government officials were becoming interested in the new paradigm as well. As early as 1995, the government's S&T white paper referred to the quote-unquote technological innovation system as the consensus of international academic circles. In late 1995 and 1996, the State Science and Technology Commission hosted a team of experts from the International Development Research Center, or IDRC, in Canada for a review of the country's S&T system. The team's subsequent report devoted a chapter to the National Innovation System concept and how it applied in China. This clearly made an impression on the commission. In fact, one Chinese participant later described the experience as a quote-unquote shock, prompting the commission to set up a team to study the issue. It did not take long for the party leadership to endorse the concept. In February of 1998, General Secretary Jiang Zemin visited the Chinese Academy of Sciences and stated that we must truly build our own innovation system. In June, Jiang's line was endorsed by the Science, Technology, and Education Leading Small Group, which was chaired by Premier Zhu Rongji. In August 1999, both Jiang and Zhu praised the concept at a national conference on technological innovation, and the conference decision called for strengthening the construction of the National Innovation System. The interest in the National Innovation Systems concept has since endured. The phrase itself has appeared regularly in the People's Daily since Jiang's public endorsement in 1998, as you can see from the graph on the screen. The phrase has also appeared in every overall 5-year plan issued by the Chinese government since 2001, including the 14th 5-year plan in 2021. And the phrase, an innovation system, has appeared in most of the government work reports delivered by the Premier since 1999. It's important to keep in mind that the growing fascination with the National Innovation System did not mean that Chinese leaders no longer cared about science and technology. Instead, the new paradigm was essentially layered on top of its predecessor. S&T still mattered and was seen as important, but it was now seen in a wider context. But how exactly has the innovation systems policy paradigm been localized in China? You'll recall that broader economic ideology shapes the particular variant of the paradigm that emerges in a given country. Greater support for state intervention in the economy implies greater support for guiding the innovation system. In China, the parties drift away from market-oriented reforms, and the shift toward a more interventionist approach is well documented in the secondary literature, even if its precise origins remain contested. It appears to have begun in the 2000s, intensifying after the global financial crisis underscored the dangers of unfettered capitalism. More recently, scholars have documented the party's growing commitment to government steerage or party-state capitalism and the rise of CCP. The shift toward a more interventionist ideology has culminated in an important change in how CCP leaders express the basic challenge or primary contradiction in party discourse facing the country. Starting in 1987, party congresses, which are held every 5 years, consistently describe the primary contradiction as between the needs of the people and backward social production, formula that justified market-oriented reforms. At the 19th Party Congress in 2017, however, Xi Jinping's report redefined this contradiction as between the people's ever-growing needs for a better life and unbalanced and inadequate development. This line was then repeated at the 20th Party Congress in 2022. This may not sound like that big a change, but in terms of party discourse, it was actually quite momentous. In fact, Xi Jinping went on to call it an historic shift that affects the whole landscape and that creates many new demands for the work of the party and the country. In other words, a more active and interventionist party state. This shift toward a more interventionist economic ideology implies strong support for party-state guidance of the innovation system. And such support was evident soon after Xi took office. To give just one example, in September 2013, Xi addressed a Politburo study session and said that regarding how to build the innovation system, we must carefully consider. He then went on to say that to implement the innovation-driven development strategy, we must not step on the watermelon rind and slide wherever we go, but must focus on top-level design and task implementation. Top-level design must propose realistic development directions, goals, and work priorities. 3 years later, the formal outline for the innovation-driven development strategy was released, and it highlighted what those directions, goals, and priorities were. In broad terms, they included creating new engines of development, leading a revolution in energy production and consumption, and building an environmentally friendly society. They also included security objectives, such as building a safe China and developing the armed forces through military-civil fusion. So what does the new paradigm imply for Chinese policy? Well, it clearly implies growing efforts to develop the wider innovation system in China on the supply side and the demand side. It also implies a more prominent role for the state in these domains. And that's exactly what we see if you look at what China has done. Let's start with the supply side, and in particular, the financing of innovation. To give a really prominent example, the Chinese government has not only sought to develop venture capital in China, but has also fostered a large number of government-guided funds, or GGFs. These are funds set up by central and local governments in pursuit of particular developmental priorities. While a professional managing agency is usually selected to operate the fund, they are evaluated with regard to their compliance with policy goals. Not all these funds focus on startup firms, but many of them focus on high-tech priorities like so-called strategic emerging industries. The GGFs began to appear in the 2000s, and by 2008, the State Council endorsed the establishment of state-backed venture funds. Then starting in 2014, Chinese government bodies issued a series of supportive policies and regulations, and the number of funds really took off. There was a surge of new funds between 2015 and 2017, as you can see from the graph on the screen here. By the end of 2022, there were more than 2,000 of these funds in China. The collective target size of the funds at that point totaled just under 13 trillion renminbi, of which 6.5 trillion renminbi had actually been raised. The latter figure was more than 5% of China's GDP that year. We also see supply-side measures designed to promote knowledge sharing in China's innovation system. In 2016, the 13th Five-Year Plan for Science, Technology, and Innovation called for stronger strategic alliances and closer cooperation between industry, universities, and research institutes. The plan also called for a variety of experiments to facilitate the movement of human capital between industry and academia, including the use of corporate experience as a necessary condition for newly hired engineering teachers in colleges and universities. The government also seeks to guide this activity in keeping with national priorities. In 2017, for example, the government's Artificial Intelligence Action Plan called for the development of innovation platforms, later called open innovation platforms, to promote development in 4 key areas of the sector. 4 leading firms, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and iFlyTech, were subsequently chosen to lead platforms in autonomous driving, smart cities, medical imaging, and smart audio, respectively. The government asked these platforms to create innovative communities, promoting knowledge sharing and collaboration between leading and smaller firms in these fields, while also promoting collaboration with research institutes and academics. By 2019, 11 additional platforms had been approved. On the screen, you can see each of these 15 platforms depicted, including the company chosen to lead it. More recently, the party state has promoted knowledge sharing and collaboration through the development of innovation consortia. These have been organized at various levels of the political system to pursue a range of technological priorities. They're typically led by a lead actor, which is often a prominent firm or a research institute. Membership in the consortia can include not only firms, but also universities, research institutes, and national laboratories, which are linked by contractual arrangements that specify goals and rewards. The number of these consortia appears to be growing rapidly. Xinjiang apparently aims to create 10 of them by 2025, while Zhejiang province aims to create 50 of them by that year. In fact, Barry Naughton at UCSD estimates that there are already hundreds of active consortia nationwide. China has also invested in demand-side policies, and the state has been quite prominent here as well. In 2010, the government announced the Strategic Emerging Industries Initiative to promote development in seven cutting-edge sectors, ranging from next-generation information technology to new energy vehicles. The announcement notably called for actively fostering markets for priority sectors, and in fact, some such efforts were already underway at the time. In 2009, for example, the government had begun introducing measures to stimulate demand for new energy vehicles in both the public sector and among private consumers, setting a goal that such vehicles would reach 5% of all passenger vehicle sales by 2011. China has also stepped up the use of government procurement to provide demand for new products in priority sectors. In fact, Chinese scholars have noted a surge of new policies in this regard between 2015 and 2017, right around the time that the innovation-driven development strategy was released. We've also seen the rise of what is called enlisting and leading in China since Xi Jinping publicly endorsed the practice in 2016. In essence, governments at various levels publish lists of priority S&T challenges and offer rewards for solutions. The list may be developed by government, or societal actors such as enterprises may recommend items or lists for government to endorse. A recent Chinese study documented more than 1,200 such lists generated in 23 different provinces between 2016 and 2021. Roughly 55% of them had been generated by government, and about 45% were recommended by societal actors. The Chinese government has also developed initiatives that combine supply side and demand side measures. An important case in point is the emerging system to cultivate small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, in priority areas. In 2015, the Made in China 2025 program, which focuses on high-tech manufacturing, pledged to stimulate the entrepreneurial and innovative vitality of small and medium-sized enterprises, and to develop a group of specialized little giant enterprises that were particularly exceptional. Since then, a multi-tiered support system for SMEs, dubbed the Accelerator State by the Mercator Institute in Berlin, has emerged. The lowest tier consists of innovative SMEs identified by provincial governments. The next tier consists of more advanced firms identified as specialized SMEs. Particularly impressive SMEs that meet a range of criteria are designated little giants. And advanced SMEs that reach a certain scale are named manufacturing champions. In general, state-favored SMEs enjoy access to a variety of supply-side benefits, including easier access to bank loans, subsidies, stock market listings, and opportunities to collaborate with universities and research institutes. These SMEs also receive help on the demand side as the government works to integrate them into the supply chains of larger firms. Not surprisingly, the initiative has attracted quite strong interest. And by mid-2023, the central government have reportedly identified more than 12,000 little giants and more than 1,000 manufacturing champions, exceeding the targets set for 2025. China's experiment with guided innovation is both novel and incredibly ambitious, and it remains to be seen how successful it will be. It is clear that tremendous resources are being poured into this effort, and that some of these investments are paying off. China's high-tech achievements in recent years, from quantum communications to hypersonic weaponry, should certainly not be dismissed. Even so, it is clear that China still faces a great many challenges. One basic challenge is combining government guidance with support for creative entrepreneurial activity. The GGFs created toward this end are impressive, but they have often struggled to find quality investment targets. Recent research indicates that only 34% of them had made an investment in a firm or a sub-fund by 2021. Another basic challenge is making knowledge sharing and collaboration really work. Chinese scholars studying the efficiency of industry-university research institute collaboration in China have candidly described it as weak. Chinese scholars have also expressed concern about demand-side practices such as enlisting and leading, particularly when the practice is not sufficiently open and competition for rewards is seen as inadequate. More broadly, China's economy is slowing, and the international environment is much more daunting than in the past as new technology restrictions continue to emerge. Overall, then, China has great ambitions and great resources behind those ambitions, but its success in this endeavor is hardly assured. To wrap up, I'd like to make 3 broad points. First, China has clearly embraced the innovation systems policy paradigm since the 1990s. And by embracing a paradigm that was first articulated in the West, China's approach to STI policy resonates with what you often see in Western countries. Second, China is developing its own variant of this paradigm, a variant that emphasizes guided innovation in particular. This is why China is pursuing innovation in a very distinctive way and diverging from what you typically see in the West. Third, the objectives and resources behind China's pursuit of guided innovation make it the most ambitious effort of its kind in the world. In that sense, China's grand experiment represents a remarkable gamble, the outcome of which remains uncertain. Thank you.